People say, fairytale stepmothers give you poisoned apples. Mine gave me a subpoena on a Monday morning demanding everything I own. She walked into court wearing a $5,000 suit, smiling like a shark. She thought my silence was fear. She did not know that for 6 months while she spun lies, I was building a cage. Today she locks herself inside it the moment the bailiff reads item number 5 on her greedy list. My name is Charles Williams. If you looked at me, sitting at the defendant's table that Monday morning, you would not have seen a man who was about to dismantle a multi-million-dollar conspiracy. You would have seen a man who looked tired. You would have seen a man in a gray suit that was bought off the rack 3 years ago, a suit that fit well enough but lacked the sharp, predatory tailoring of the men sitting across the aisle. You would have seen a scuffed leather briefcase resting against the leg of my chair, the kind of bag that has seen more subway floors than boardrooms. And next to it, a stainless steel thermos filled with black coffee that was slowly going lukewarm. The courtroom 4B of the Superior Court, had a very specific smell. It was a mixture of lemon floor wax, old dry wood, and the stale, recycled air of 1,000 bad decisions. It was the smell of bureaucracy and despair. But at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, that smell was violently erased. It was replaced by the scent of jasmine and crushing wealth. Elena Vance had arrived. My stepmother did not walk into rooms. She invaded them. She pushed through the double doors at the back of the courtroom, with the energy of a woman who owned the building and was graciously allowing the rest of us to occupy it. She was wearing a white suit that I knew for a fact cost $5,000. It was blindingly bright against the drab brown benches of the gallery. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, exposing a neck that held a single, tasteful string of pearls. She looked immaculate. She looked like she was on her way to a charity gala to save endangered tigers, not to a court of law to eviscerate her late husband's only son. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The bailiff, a man named Miller, who looked like he had not smiled since 1995, straightened his tie. The court reporter paused her typing. Even the air conditioning seemed to hum a little quieter in deference to her presence. She walked past my table without turning her head, leaving that trail of expensive perfume in her wake, a scent that clogged my throat. It was the same perfume she had worn at my father's funeral 6 months ago. Back then, she had clung to my arm, sobbing into my shoulder, while photographers snapped pictures of the grieving widow. Today she sat 10 feet away from me, and the distance felt like a canyon filled with broken glass. Next to her sat Arthur Blackwood. If Elena was the shark, Blackwood was the remora that attached itself to the predator's underbelly, feeding on the scraps. He was a man composed entirely of sharp angles and oil. He placed his briefcase on the table with a heavy thud, a sound calculated to announce his authority. He leaned over and whispered something to Elena, and she gave him a small, tragic nod, dabbing at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief. The performance had begun before the judge even entered the room. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison walked in. He was a man in his late 60s with a face carved out of granite and eyes that had seen every variation of human greed imaginable. He did not look happy to be there. He moved with the slow, deliberate weight of authority, his black robe swishing softly as he took the bench. He adjusted his glasses, looked at the docket, and then looked down at us. His gaze lingered on Elena for a moment, then shifted to me. I sat up straighter, clasping my hands on the empty table in front of me. "Case number 492, Vance versus Williams," Judge Harrison said, his voice a low rumble. "Emergency petition for conservatorship and asset freezing. Counsel, please identify yourselves." Blackwood shot to his feet. "Arthur Blackwood, representing the petitioner, Mrs. Elena Vance." His voice was smooth, like expensive whiskey poured over gravel. The judge looked at me. I stood up slowly. "Charles Williams, Your Honor, Respondent." "Very well," Harrison said, waving a hand. "Mr. Blackwood, this is an emergency motion. You are claiming imminent dissipation of assets. That is a high bar. Let us hear why we are rushing this through on a Monday morning." Blackwood buttoned his jacket and walked to the center of the room. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the gallery, playing to an audience that wasn't there before turning his focus to the bench. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, his tone dripping with grave concern. "We are not here because we want to be. We are here because we have no choice. My client, Mrs. Vance, has spent the last 6 months trying to protect the legacy of her late husband, a man who built a business empire from nothing. She has tried to nurture his son. She has tried to guide him." He paused for effect, turning to point a manicured finger at me. I did not flinch. I kept my face completely neutral, a mask of calm that I had practiced in the mirror for hours. "But Charles Williams is a man in crisis," Blackwood continued, his voice rising in volume. "Since the death of his father, the respondent has spiraled into a chaotic existence that threatens to destroy everything his father worked for. We have evidence. Your Honor, undeniable evidence that Mr. Williams is suffering from a severe gambling addiction and an acute psychological break." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Gambling addiction, psychological break. I felt a muscle in my jaw twitch, but I forced it to relax. This was the narrative they had chosen. It was smart. It was hard to disprove quickly. It turned my quiet life into a symptom of madness. "He has been seen frequenting high-stakes environments," Blackwood lied, pacing back and forth. "He has been withdrawing large sums of cash, thousands of dollars at a time, with no explanation. He has neglected the basic maintenance of the properties entrusted to him. He is erratic. He is paranoid. He is simply put incompetent to manage the estate left to him." I looked at Elena. She was looking down at her hands, twisting a diamond ring on her finger. She looked small. She looked vulnerable. If I did not know her, I would have felt sorry for her. She raised her head slightly, catching the judge's eye, and gave a tremble of her lip. "I just want to help him, Your Honor," she said, her voice soft, breaking perfectly on the last word. "I promised his father I would look after him. I cannot stand by and watch him destroy himself. It breaks my heart." She sniffed loudly, and Blackwood placed a comforting hand on her shoulder before turning back to the judge with a look of righteous indignation. "We are asking the court to intervene before it is too late. We are asking for an emergency guardianship over the assets in question to prevent total insolvency." Judge Harrison leaned back in his leather chair. He did not look moved by the tears. He looked bored. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mr. Blackwood, these are serious accusations. Calling a grown man incompetent requires more than just withdrawals and a bad attitude." "We have affidavits, Your Honor," Blackwood said quickly, slapping a thick file onto the judge's bench. "We have statements from financial experts. We have a preliminary assessment from a psychiatrist who has reviewed Mr. Williams's behavior patterns. The pattern is clear. Manic spending followed by depressive withdrawal." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black moleskin notebook and a cheap ballpoint pen. I opened it to a fresh page. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise from my side of the room. I began to write. I wrote down the word gambling. I underlined it. I wrote down paranoid. I underlined that too. I kept my head down, focusing entirely on the ink flowing onto the paper. I could feel Elena's eyes on me. The scratching of my pen seemed to irritate her. She shifted in her seat, the leather creaking. She expected me to jump up. She expected me to shout, to call her a liar, to prove exactly how unstable I was. That was the script they had written for me. An angry man is a guilty man. A quiet man is a dangerous mystery. "Mr. Williams," Judge Harrison said, his voice cutting through Blackwood's monologue. I stopped writing and stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "You have heard the allegations," the judge said. "Mr. Blackwood claims you are throwing your inheritance onto a poker table and that you are mentally unfit to handle a checkbook. Do you have a response? I looked at the judge. Then I looked at Blackwood, and finally I let my gaze settle on Elena. For a second, just a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a cold, hard glare of anticipation. She wanted the outburst. I have no response to the emotional characterizations, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady and low. I will address the facts when it is my turn. I sat back down and resumed writing. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. He looked at Blackwood. Continue. Blackwood seemed thrown off balance for a moment. He cleared his throat. Yes. Well, as I was saying, the urgency is paramount. We have reason to believe Mr. Williams is planning to liquidate major assets this week to cover debts. Therefore, we are submitting this emergency motion for asset guardianship. He handed a copy of the motion to the bailiff, who brought it to my table. I took the document. It was heavy. The paper was thick, high quality. The title was bold and aggressive. Emergency Motion for Temporary Guardianship and Asset Freeze. I flipped through the pages. It was a wish list. It was a robbery in progress, codified in legal font. Item 1. The residential property located at 412 Oak Street. That was my apartment. Item 2. The commercial lease and contents of the property at 889 Industrial Way. That was my watch restoration workshop. Item 3. All savings and checking accounts held at First National Bank. I scanned the list, my face impassive, while my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. They wanted everything. They wanted to strip me naked and leave me on the street legally, binding my hands so I could not even buy a sandwich without Elena's permission. It was thorough. It was ruthless. It was exactly what I had expected. Blackwood was wrapping up his opening. Your Honor, this is not about punishment. This is about preservation. Mrs. Vance is willing to take on the burden of managing these complex assets. She is a captain of industry. She runs Vance and Partners. She knows how to manage wealth. Mr. Williams repairs old clocks. The disparity in competence is obvious. Watch, I whispered to myself, writing it down. I repair watches. We ask that the court grant the temporary guardianship immediately effective as of 12 o'clock today to prevent any further hemorrhaging of the estate's value. Blackwood finished buttoning his jacket again, as if he had just delivered the Gettysburg Address. He sat down, looking pleased. Elena patted his arm. The courtroom fell silent again. The air felt heavy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm breaks. The judge was reading the motion. The rustle of pages was deafening. I took a sip of water from the plastic cup on my table. It was warm. Judge Harrison looked up over his reading glasses. He peered at me. I looked small in that big chair with my worn-out briefcase and my silence. Mr. Williams, the judge said. I stood up. I see you are seated alone at the defense table, Judge Harrison said. His eyes scanned the empty chairs next to me. These are complex allegations, son. And the motion Mr. Blackwood has filed is aggressive. If granted, you will lose control of your bank accounts by lunchtime. Do you understand the gravity of this? I do, Your Honor, I said. Where is your counsel? The judge asked. Did you not receive notice in time to retain an attorney? If you need a continuance to find representation, I am inclined to grant it, although Mr. Blackwood will likely object. This was the moment. The fork in the road. A continuance would give me time, but it would show weakness. It would show that I was unprepared. And more importantly, it would give Elena time to hide what she had done. I needed this to happen now. I needed the trap to snap shut today, while she still felt invincible. I looked directly at Judge Harrison. I did not fidget. I did not look at my notes. I received the notice this morning, Your Honor, I said clearly, but I do not need a continuance. You have a lawyer coming? Harrison asked. No, Your Honor, I said. My voice echoed slightly in the high-ceilinged room. I am representing myself." A ripple of murmurs went through the few people sitting in the gallery. Representing yourself in a case like this was suicide. It was the first sign of the madness Blackwood had just described. I saw Blackwood smirk. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs. He clearly thought this was Christmas morning. He turned to Elena and whispered something. I did not have to guess what it was. I could see the relaxation in her shoulders. She stopped acting. She stopped the grieving widow routine because she thought the fight was already over. A fool who represents himself has a fool for a client. That was the old saying. Judge Harrison looked at me for a long time. He was assessing me. He was looking for the crazy in my eyes. He was looking for the tremor in my hands. He found neither. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more serious. "I must advise you against this. Mr. Blackwood is a senior partner at a major firm. The rules of evidence are complicated. If you proceed pro se, I cannot give you legal advice. You will be held to the same standards as a member of the bar. Are you sure you wish to proceed?" "I am sure, Your Honor," I replied. "The truth does not require a law degree to be understood. It just requires sunlight." "Very well," Harrison said, though he looked skeptical. "It is your funeral. Or your trial, I suppose." He gestured for me to sit down. As I lowered myself back into the hard wooden chair, I glanced across the aisle. Elena was no longer looking at the judge. She was looking at me. Her lips were curled into a faint, cruel smile, the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse that has just run into a dead end. She leaned over to Blackwood, bringing her mouth close to his ear, but her eyes never left mine. The courtroom was quiet enough that I could almost read her lips, but I didn't have to. The shape of the words was unmistakable. She whispered with the confidence of a woman who believes she has just won the lottery. "He is finished." I opened my notebook again. I looked at the list of accusations. Then I looked at the small blue sticky note I had placed on the inside cover of my folder. It had one word written on it: Bluebird. I capped my pen. I looked back at her. And for the first time that morning, I allowed myself to feel something other than cold calculation. I felt pity. Not for myself, but for her. Because she had no idea that she wasn't the hunter in this room. She was the bait, and she had just taken the first bite. Arthur Blackwood did not waste a second. He moved with the aggressive energy of a man who knew he had the winning hand and wanted to slam it onto the table before anyone else could place a bet. He signaled to an assistant, a young paralegal who looked terrified, and a projector screen descended from the ceiling of the courtroom with a mechanical whir that sounded like a saw cutting through bone. The lights in the room dimmed slightly. The first slide appeared. It was a blown-up image of my bank statement from First National Bank. Blackwood picked up a laser pointer, the red dot dancing across the numbers like a sniper finding a target. "Your Honor," Blackwood boomed his voice, filling every corner of the room. "They say that money talks. Well, in the case of Mr. Williams, his money is screaming for help." The red dot settled on a transaction dated October 14th. $5,000, Blackwood said, lingering on the amount. "Withdrawn in cash at 11 o'clock at night." He clicked a button. The dot moved to another line. "November 2nd, $3,500, cash withdrawal, 2 in the morning." He spun around to face the gallery, his coattails flaring. "December 10th, $8,000, cash, again late at night." Tell me, ladies and gentlemen, what kind of business requires $8,000 in non-traceable bills at midnight on a Tuesday? Is it a grocery run? Is it a charitable donation? He paused, letting the silence stretch, until it was uncomfortable. Or is it the desperate act of a man trying to pay off a bookie before his legs get broken? I sat there, watching the red dot quiver on the screen. The context was beautiful in its absence. October 14th was the night I purchased a rare movement from a collector who was flying to Zurich the next morning and demanded cash. November 2nd was an estate sale in New Jersey, where I bought a box of 17th century tools. December 10th was a deposit for gold leafing required for the restoration of a grandfather clock belonging to the City Museum. But Blackwood had surgically removed the why and left only the what. He had turned my livelihood into a vice. I looked down at my watch. It was a piece I had restored myself, a 1927 Vacheron Constantin. The escapement was rhythmic, steady, unbothered by the lies filling the room. I needed to be like the watch. Accurate, unwavering. "We are not relying solely on numbers," Blackwood continued, sensing he had the room's attention. "We have expert testimony regarding the respondent's mental state." He gestured to the side door. "I call Dr. Julian Thorne to the stand." Dr. Thorne walked in. He was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a laboratory designed to produce trustworthy television doctors. He wore a tweed jacket with patches on the elbows and glasses that made him look intellectual, but approachable. I recognized him immediately. Elena had insisted I speak to him 3 months ago over a video call, under the guise of grief counseling after my father passed. I had spoken to him for exactly 20 minutes. Thorne took the oath, swearing to tell the whole truth. I wondered if he knew the irony of that statement. "Dr. Thorne," Blackwood asked, leaning on the witness stand, "you had a clinical consultation with Mr. Williams regarding his grief and mental stability, correct?" "I did," Thorne said. His voice was soft, practiced, full of professional concern. "And what was your assessment?" Thorne took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. It was a stalling tactic to make him seem thoughtful. Mr. Williams exhibited classic signs of paranoid ideation. He spoke of being watched. He was defensive, secretive. He showed a significant detachment from reality, often obsessing over minor details, while ignoring the larger picture of his life. In my professional opinion, he is currently incapable of making sound financial decisions due to this persecutory delusion. "So," Blackwood said, raising an eyebrow, "if he thought someone was out to get him, he might, say, hide money, or spend it recklessly to keep it away from these imaginary enemies." "It is a very common coping mechanism for that specific pathology," Thorne agreed, nodding sagely. It was a masterpiece of fiction. I had told Thorne I was worried about corporate espionage at my father's company. That was the paranoia he was referring to. They had taken my legitimate concerns about Elena's business practices and twisted them into a diagnosis of insanity. I wrote in my notebook, "Dr. Thorne. Unlicensed in this state? Check reciprocity laws." Judge Harrison looked over at me. "Mr. Williams, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" I stood up. "No, Your Honor. I will save my questions for the evidence portion." Harrison looked surprised, perhaps even disappointed. "Very well. Step down." Blackwood looked like he had just won the lottery. He motioned for Elena to stand up. "I would like to ask Mrs. Vance to speak to the nature of the estate and the damage being done." Elena rose. She did not walk to the witness stand. She stood at her table, gripping the edge of it, as if she needed the support to stay upright under the weight of her sorrow. "I loved my husband," Elena began, her voice trembling just enough to be audible, but retaining a brave quality. "He built Vance and Partners with his bare hands. He wanted his legacy to last for generations. He wanted Charles to be a part of it." She looked at me, her eyes, wet with tears, that I knew she could summon on command. "I tried, Your Honor. I really did. I paid off his debts quietly. I covered for him when he missed board meetings. I thought if I just loved him enough, he would stop the gambling. He would stop the spiral." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "But when I saw the bank accounts last week, when I saw that he had drained nearly 15% of the liquid cash in less than a month, I knew I had to be the villain to save him. He calls me a monster for bringing this to court. But a mother does what she has to do to keep her child from ruining his life." The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear the scratching of the court reporter's machine. The people in the gallery were looking at me with disgust. To them, I was the ungrateful prodigal son throwing away a fortune while this saint of a woman tried to clean up my mess. Judge Harrison turned his gaze to me. It was not a friendly look. It was the look of a man who had seen too many spoiled children waste their parents' hard work. "Mr. Williams," the judge said sharply, "you have remained silent while serious accusations have been leveled against you. The petitioner claims you have burned through tens of thousands of dollars in a matter of weeks. Is this true?" I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I did not look at the gallery. I looked only at the judge. "The transactions exist, Your Honor," I said calmly. "The interpretation of them, however, is a complete fabrication." "Fabrication?" the judge asked, leaning forward. "You deny withdrawing the money?" "I do not deny the withdrawals," I said. "I deny the purpose. I am a horologist, Your Honor. I restore antique timepieces. It is a cash business. I buy parts from private collectors. I pay for materials. Every single cent is accounted for in my ledgers." "Ledgers which you conveniently keep hidden," Blackwood interrupted from his seat, breaking protocol. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge warned. "Apologies, Your Honor," Blackwood said, standing up. "But we are wasting time. He admits to taking the cash. He has no receipts here. He has no proof. We have a psychiatrist saying he is delusional and bank statements proving he is bleeding the accounts dry. We need to stop the bleeding now." Blackwood walked to the center of the room, his voice rising to a crescendo. "Your Honor, I move that the court grants the emergency conservatorship immediately. We ask that the court seals the residence at 412 Oak Street and the commercial property at 889 Industrial Way. We ask that law enforcement be dispatched to secure the premises, and that Mr. Williams be ordered to surrender all keys and access codes effectively immediately." The air in the room seemed to vanish. If the judge banged his gavel, now it was over. My shop would be padlocked. My files, my tools, my evidence. Everything would be in Elena's hands within the hour. The crowd behind me began to whisper. "Disgraceful," I heard a woman murmur. "Gambling it all away," a man whispered back. The pressure was physical. It felt like the walls were leaning in, pushing me toward the edge of a cliff. Elena was watching me. Her handkerchief lowered her mouth, set in a grim line of victory. She was waiting for me to break. She was waiting for me to beg. Judge Harrison looked at the motion papers in front of him. He picked up his pen. He was ready to sign. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. It was not loud, but it was hard, like steel striking flint. The judge paused, the pen hovering inches above the paper. "Mr. Williams, before you rule on the disposition of my property," I said, "I would like to review the specific asset list referenced in Mr. Blackwood's motion. The copy I received this morning was a summary. I want to see the sworn affidavit of assets that Mrs. Vance submitted to the court." Blackwood laughed. It was a short, barking sound. "This is absurd. He is stalling, Your Honor. He doesn't even know what he owns. He is so checked out of reality, he needs a list to remind him of his own bank accounts." "It is my right to review the evidence against me," I said, ignoring Blackwood, and keeping my eyes locked on the judge. "If Mrs. Vance is demanding control of these specific items, I need to verify that these items actually exist and are described accurately." Judge Harrison hesitated. He looked at the clock. Then he looked at Blackwood. "It is a reasonable request, counsel. Give him the exhibit." Blackwood rolled his eyes, a gesture of exaggerated patience. He grabbed a thick folder from his table and shoved it into the hands of Miller the bailiff. "Make it quick," Blackwood muttered. Miller walked over to my table. His heavy boots thudded against the floor. He handed me the file. It was warm from being under the heap of other papers. I opened it. The pages were crisp. The font was standard Legal Times New Roman. I scanned the first page. Item 1. Residential apartment correct. Item 2, commercial lease correct. Item 3, First National Savings correct. I could feel Elena's gaze boring into the side of my head. She was confident. She thought this was just a desperate man reading his own obituary. I turned the page. And there it was. My hand froze for a fraction of a second. Just a twitch. But inside my chest, my heart skipped a beat and then slammed into a rhythm of pure cold adrenaline. I read the line again to be absolutely sure. The ink was black and permanent. The signature at the bottom of the page belonged to Elena Vance, swearing, under penalty of perjury, that the list was accurate and complete. She had done it. She had actually done it. I looked up from the paper. I did not look at the judge. I did not look at Blackwood. I turned my head slowly, deliberately, until I was looking directly at Elena. She was smirking, waiting for me to crumble. But when our eyes met, her smile faltered. She saw something she did not expect. She did not see fear. She did not see confusion. She saw the look of a man who had just watched his enemy walk voluntarily into a guillotine and place her own neck on the block. A cold, razor-sharp light flashed in my eyes. I closed the folder with a soft, definitive snap. "Thank you," I said to the room, but I was speaking only to her. "I have seen everything I need to see." I did not sit down. The wood of the defense table was smooth under my fingertips, but I did not lean on it for support. The folder containing Elena's list of demands lay closed in front of me, a coffin for her credibility, though she did not know it yet. The air in the courtroom was stagnant, heavy with the dust of old laws and the humidity of eager anticipation. Everyone was waiting for the gavel to fall. They were waiting for the end. I reached into the inner pocket of my gray suit jacket. The movement was slow, deliberate, the motion of a man reaching for a cigarette in a firing squad line. But instead of a cigarette, I pulled out a single, sealed envelope. It was blue. Not the pale, friendly blue of a summer sky, but the deep, authoritative navy of a naval uniform. It was thick, packed tight with high-density paper. "Your Honor," I said. My voice had changed. The hesitation was gone. The quiet, beaten-down tone I had used to answer the initial questions had evaporated, replaced by a clarity that rang against the mahogany walls. "Before you rule on the motion for guardianship, I have a preliminary motion of my own. I ask that the court examine the contents of this envelope." Arthur Blackwood was on his feet before I had even finished the sentence. He moved with the jerky irritation of a man whose victory lap had been interrupted. "Objection," Blackwood barked. "This is highly irregular. Mr. Williams is not a lawyer. He cannot just pull surprise evidence out of his pocket like a street magician. Discovery is closed for the emergency hearing. This is a transparent delaying tactic designed to keep the court from freezing assets he is likely liquidating as we speak." Judge Harrison looked at Blackwood. Then he looked at me. He was an old judge. He had seen every trick in the book. He knew the smell of desperation, but he also knew the smell of something else. He was looking at my eyes, and he saw that the panic Blackwood described was entirely absent. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, his voice gravelly, "Mr. Blackwood is technically correct. We are here to discuss the plaintiff's motion. Unless this envelope contains a direct refutation of the specific allegations of financial mismanagement, it is inadmissible at this stage." "It does not refute the spending, Your Honor," I said. I walked around the table, moving into the open space of the courtroom floor. I felt the eyes of the gallery on my back. "It refutes the source of the information. It challenges the legality of the entire petition." I held the envelope out to the bailiff, Mr. Miller. "This envelope contains proof that the petitioner, Mrs. Elena Vance, has obtained her information through illegal digital surveillance in direct violation of state privacy laws and the Federal Wiretap Act." The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of boredom. It was the vacuum of shock. I heard a sharp intake of breath from the plaintiff's table. It was not Blackwood. It was Elena. "This is outrageous," Blackwood sputtered, his face flushing a dark, angry red. "My client is a respected business leader. She does not spy on people." "Then let the judge read the report," I said calmly. "Judge," Harrison gestured to Miller. The bailiff took the blue envelope from my hand and carried it to the bench. The sound of his boots on the floor was the only thing keeping time. He handed it up. The judge took a silver letter opener, slipped the top of the envelope, and slid the contents out. He put on his reading glasses. For 2 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rustle of paper and the hum of the air conditioner. I watched the judge's face. I watched his eyebrows knit together. I watched his eyes narrow as he scanned the lines of data. Then he looked up. He looked directly at Elena Vance. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said. His voice was very quiet, which was terrifying. "Are you aware of a software program called Spectre Key Professional?" Blackwood blinked. He looked at Elena. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of porcelain perfection, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her Gucci purse. "I am not a computer expert, Your Honor," Blackwood stammered. "Well, Mr. Williams seems to be," the judge said. "Mr. Williams, please explain to the court what Exhibit A in this envelope represents." I turned to face the judge. I did not look at Elena, not yet. 3 months ago, I began my voice, steady and clinical. On the evening of November 5th, my personal laptop was accessed while I was attending a dinner at the Vance residence. I had left my bag in the study. When I returned home, the machine seemed normal. However, during a routine system diagnostic the following morning, I discovered a background process that I did not install. I pointed to the papers in the judge's hand. That process was a keystroke logger. It records every button pressed on the keyboard, every password, every email draft, every search query. It takes screenshots every 30 seconds, and it runs invisibly. "And how do you know who installed it?" the judge asked. "The software is configured to exfiltrate data," I explained. "It has to send the stolen information somewhere. Usually these programs send data to an anonymous cloud server. This one was sloppy, or perhaps just arrogant. I traced the outbound data packets. I took a step closer to the bench. Page 3 of the report, Your Honor. The IP address receiving the data packages is static. 1921684410. That is not a cloud server. That is a private corporate server." I paused to let the words sink in. "It is the dedicated secure server for the executive offices of Vance and Partners." The courtroom erupted, not with shouting, but with a sudden collective shift in posture. The reporters in the back row started scribbling furiously. The sleepy vibe of a probate hearing had vanished, replaced by the electric charge of a criminal accusation. Blackwood looked like he had been slapped. He leaned down, whispering frantically to Elena. She was whispering back, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "Order," Judge Harrison said, though he didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Mr. Blackwood, your client is asking for guardianship based on financial records. Are you telling me these records were obtained through a keylogger installed on the respondent's private computer?" Blackwood stood up. He was a professional. He smoothed his tie. He tried to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice taking on a tone of righteous pleading. "We must look at the intent here. As we have established, Mrs. Vance has been terrified for her stepson's safety. He was erratic. He was disappearing. Yes, perhaps in her desperation to ensure he wasn't buying drugs or gambling himself into debt with dangerous people, she might have authorized a monitoring protocol." He spread his hands wide, appealing to the judge's humanity. "This was not corporate espionage, Your Honor. This was a mother trying to keep an eye on a troubled child. It was a digital baby monitor. Nothing more. If the method was a bit overzealous, it was done out of love and fear for his life." Elena nodded vigorously, dabbing at her eyes again. "I just wanted to make sure he was safe," she squeaked. "I was so worried." Judge Harrison looked at her. His expression was unreadable. "Counselor," the judge said to Blackwood, "the law does not make an exception for worried mothers. Unauthorized interception of electronic communications is a felony. You cannot ask this court to grant you legal power over a man based on evidence you committed a crime to obtain." "We dispute the characterization of it as a crime," Blackwood insisted, sweating slightly now. "It was a family matter, a safety intervention." "It is a violation of the Fourth Amendment rights to privacy," I cut in. Blackwood spun on me. "You are not a lawyer, Charles. Stop citing amendments you don't understand." "I understand enough," I said, my voice dropping lower, becoming harder. "I understand that for 3 months, your client has been reading my personal diary. She has been reading my emails to my clients. She has been watching me through my webcam." I turned to the judge. "But that is not the most important part, Your Honor." Judge Harrison leaned forward. "What is the most important part, Mr. Williams?" I took a deep breath. This was the turn. This was the moment I had been waiting for since that cold morning in November, when I first saw the strange line of code on my monitor. "Mr. Blackwood claims this was done out of love," I said. "He claims it was an intervention to stop me from ruining myself. He claims they acted as soon as they saw the danger." I smiled. It was a cold, humorless smile. "But the software was installed 3 months ago. The withdrawals they are citing, the gambling money, started 2 months ago. If Mrs. Vance was watching my every move, she saw me withdraw that cash. She saw me go to the bank. She saw me visit the antique dealers. She read the emails where I negotiated the prices for the watch parts. I walked over to the defense table and picked up my own copy of the log files. She knew exactly what I was buying. She knew I wasn't gambling. The keylogger logs the URLs I visited. It shows I was on auction sites for horology parts, not online casinos. It shows I was emailing suppliers, not bookies." I turned to face Elena. Her face had gone pale, her makeup standing out in stark relief against her skin. "She had the truth on her screen for 90 days, I said. "And yet she came into this courtroom this morning and swore under oath that I was a gambling addict. She suppressed the very evidence she stole because it didn't fit her narrative. And," I added, delivering the final blow of this sequence, "there is one more thing." "Go on," the judge said. He was not looking at the papers anymore. He was watching me with intense interest. "When I found the spyware on November 6th, I said, my first instinct was to delete it, to scrub my hard drive, to call the police." I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway outside. But I didn't. Elena's eyes widened. She stopped whispering to Blackwood. She stared at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear. Not the performed fear of a worried mother, but the primal fear of a person realizing the floor is gone. "I left the software running," I said. "I left the back door open. For 3 months I let her watch. I let her think she was the one in control. I wanted to see what she would do with the information. I wanted to see how far she would go." I looked at the judge. "I curated my digital life for her, Your Honor. I fed the beast. And today she walked into this courtroom and vomited up every piece of bait I fed her." Blackwood slumped into his chair. He was a smart man. He knew what had just happened. The dynamic of the room had shifted violently. 10 minutes ago I was a defendant fighting for my financial life. Now I was the puppet master, and his client was the one dangling on the strings. "The evidence submitted by the plaintiff is fruit of the poisonous tree," I said, using the legal term I had learned during my long nights of research. "But more than that, it proves malice. She knew the truth, and she lied to this court to steal my property." Judge Harrison sat back in his chair. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he put them back on, his gaze toward the plaintiff's table was withering. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, I suggest you take a moment to consult with your client, because if what Mr. Williams says is true, and these IP logs look very convincing, then we are no longer discussing a conservatorship. We are discussing perjury. And we are discussing criminal wiretapping. Elena looked at me. Her hate was palpable. It radiated off her like heat from a pavement. She had thought I was a broken, grieving boy who played with old clocks because I couldn't handle the real world. She had thought I was weak. She didn't understand that watchmaking is all about patience. It is about understanding how tiny, invisible gears work together to produce a result. It is about waiting for the exact right second to strike the chime. I held her gaze. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just stood there holding the blue envelope that had just cut her legs out from under her. The silence before the storm was over. The storm had arrived, and its name was Charles. Judge Harrison looked down at the blue envelope on his bench, then back at the plaintiff's table. The silence in the room was no longer the respectful silence of a court proceeding. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where a bomb had just been discovered under a chair. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said. His voice was dangerously low. "I am going to ask you this only once. Did your client redact the information obtained from this illegal surveillance before submitting it to this court as evidence?" Blackwood stood up. He was sweating. I could see the sheen of moisture on his forehead under the harsh courtroom lights. He was a man who was used to bullying people with paperwork, not fighting a criminal defense battle on the fly. "Your Honor, as I stated, I was unaware of the source of the raw data," Blackwood said, his voice tight. "I cannot speak to what was or was not redacted." "Then let me speak to it," I said. I walked back to my table and picked up a second stack of papers. These were not in an envelope. They were stapled together, organized with the precision of a man who spends his life aligning gears that are thinner than a human hair. In the plaintiff's opening statement, I addressed the room, keeping my voice level. "Mr. Blackwood showed you a bank statement from October 14th showing a cash withdrawal of $5,000. He claimed this was gambling money." I held up a piece of paper. "This is the original invoice from the estate of Henri Leclerc, a retired watchmaker in Lyon, France. On October 14th at 10 in the morning, I purchased a box of mainsprings dating back to 1910. The seller demanded cash because of the international exchange rates. The amount was exactly $5,000. I handed the paper to the bailiff. Mr. Miller took it, his eyes widening slightly as he looked at the itemized receipt. "Mr. Blackwood mentioned a withdrawal on November 2nd. I continued, picking up the next sheet. $3,500. He called it erratic spending. Here is the receipt from the New England Horological Society auction. It is for a lathe. A very specific high-precision lathe used for cutting balanced staffs. The price was $3,500. I handed that one to Miller, too. "And finally," I said, picking up the last sheet, "the $8,000 withdrawal on December 10th. The one Mr. Blackwood suggested was used to pay off a bookie before my legs got broken." I looked at Elena. She was staring at the table, her jaw set so hard I thought her teeth might crack. "This is a receipt for gold bullion and platinum wire," I said, "purchased from a certified precious metals dealer in the Diamond District. It is raw material for restoration work on a Patek Philippe pocket watch, valued at over $200,000. The client paid a deposit. I used the deposit to buy the materials. It is standard business practice." I walked over to the bailiff and placed the final receipt in his hand. "Mr. Miller," I said, "please show those to the judge." Judge Harrison took the papers. He laid them out side by side with the evidence Elena had submitted. He looked at one, then the other. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, looking up, "these dates match the bank statements perfectly. The amounts match to the penny." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "And here is the interesting part. If you look at the raw data logs from the keylogger, the ones in the blue envelope, You will see that Mrs. Vance had access to my emails. She saw the order confirmations for these items. She saw the shipping notifications. She knew exactly what that money was for. I pointed at the plaintiff's table. She did not just present incomplete evidence. She took the digital record, deleted the lines that explained the transactions, and printed the altered version for this court. That is not an omission. That is a fabrication. Arthur Blackwood looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. He began shoving papers into his briefcase, his hands shaking. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice cracking, "I need to request a recess. In light of this new information, I need time to confer with my client and review the authenticity of these documents. I move for a continuance until tomorrow morning." "Denied," Judge Harrison snapped. The word cracked like a whip. "But, Your Honor," Blackwood started. "You came into my courtroom this morning demanding emergency action," Harrison said, leaning over the bench. "You claimed there was an imminent threat to the estate. You wanted to freeze this man's life before lunch. Well, you got your emergency hearing. We are going to finish it." "But—" "Sit down, Mr. Blackwood," the judge ordered. Elena Vance stood up. She could not help herself. The mask was slipping. The cool, collected socialite was dissolving, revealing the desperate, angry woman underneath. She pushed her chair back with a screech that made everyone wince. "He is lying!" she shouted. Her voice was shrill, lacking the carefully cultivated modulation she had used earlier. "Those receipts are fake. He printed them up on his computer. You cannot believe him over me. I am the one trying to save this family." "Mrs. Vance," the judge warned, "sit down." "He is a manipulator," Elena cried out, pointing a trembling finger at me. "He has always been jealous of me. He has always hated that his father loved me. He is trying to make me look like a criminal to distract you from his own sickness." "I said sit down," Judge Harrison roared. Elena sat, but she was breathing hard, her chest heaving. The perfectly coiffed hair was slightly askew. She looked frantic. I stood perfectly still. I waited for the room to settle. I waited for her breathing to become the loudest sound in the room again. "Mrs. Vance claims I am the one manipulating the truth," I said softly. "She claims she is the caring mother figure. She claims her only motivation is love." I walked back to my table. I reached into my briefcase, the scuffed leather bag that Blackwood had sneered at earlier. I pulled out a small digital audio recorder. It was old, but reliable. "In this state," I said, addressing the judge, "the law allows for the recording of a conversation as long as one party consents to the recording. I am that party." I held up the device. 2 weeks ago, on January 15th, Mrs. Vance called me. This was before she filed the lawsuit. This was when she thought she could just bully me into handing over my inheritance without getting the courts involved. I pressed the button. The audio quality was crystal clear. The speakers in the quiet courtroom amplified every nuance of the conversation. Then my voice. "Elena, I told you. I am not signing the power of attorney. The workshop is mine. Dad left it to me." Then Elena's voice. But it was not the voice of the victim she was playing today. It was cold. It was vicious. It was the voice of a predator. "Listen to me, you little ingrate. You think you have a choice. You are a nobody. You are a man who plays with toys while adults do business. If you do not sign that paper by Monday, I will bury you. Do you understand me? I will drag you through every court in this city. I will bleed your bank accounts dry with legal fees. I will tell the world you are crazy. I will hire doctors to say you are unfit. I will take the shirt off your back and the roof over your head, and I will smile while I do it." A pause on the tape. "You wouldn't do that," my voice on the recording said. "Dad would never—" "Your father is dead," Elena's voice screamed on the tape. "He is dead and I am alive. And I win. Sign the paper, Charles, or I will destroy you." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was different than before. It was the silence of absolute condemnation. I looked at the gallery. The people who had been whispering about my gambling were now staring at Elena with open mouths. The narrative had flipped completely. They were no longer looking at a grieving widow. They were looking at a monster in a $5,000 suit. Elena was frozen. She was staring at the recorder in my hand as if it were a gun. Her face had gone from red to a sickly, pale gray. She knew that voice. Everyone knew that voice. There was no denying it. Judge Harrison was looking at her too. His expression was one of profound disgust. He looked like he wanted to go home and shower. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, his voice icy. "Is that your client's voice?" Blackwood did not stand up. He buried his face in his hands. He shook his head slowly. He knew it was over. He knew he had been led into a slaughterhouse by a client who had lied to him about everything. "I have no comment, Your Honor," Blackwood whispered. Elena turned on him. "Do something," she hissed loud enough for the front row to hear. "Stop him! Object! Say it is fake!" "It is admissible," Blackwood snapped back at her, losing his own composure. "It is a legal recording. Shut up, Elena." I placed the recorder back on the table. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger I had carried for 6 months, the anger at her insults, at her greed, at the way she had dishonored my father's memory, was draining away. It was being replaced by the cold precision of the final move. "Your Honor," I said, "you have seen the fake financial records. You have seen the evidence of illegal surveillance. You have heard the threat of malicious prosecution from her own lips." I took a step forward. "But Mrs. Vance is right about one thing. She is a businesswoman. She does not do things without a profit motive. She did not drag me here just to punish me. She dragged me here because she wants something specific." I picked up the folder, the one containing the asset list that she had sworn was accurate, the one she thought I was too stupid or too crazy to check. "Everything we have discussed so far is just smoke," I said. "The surveillance, the lies about gambling, the fake doctor. It was all just to get you to sign one piece of paper. It was all to get you to grant her control over the items in this folder." I held the folder up. "She thinks she knows what is on this list. She thinks she stole the information from my computer and pasted it into this court document. She thinks she is about to take ownership of my secret wealth." I looked at Elena. She was breathing shallow, rapid breaths. Her eyes were locked on the folder. She looked terrified, but also confused. She didn't understand. She thought she had lost the character battle, but she still believed the assets were real. She still believed the money was there. "But Mrs. Vance made a mistake," I said. "She forgot that when you steal information from a watchmaker, you have to be careful, because sometimes we build traps that look exactly like treasures." "What are you talking about?" Judge Harrison asked. He was leaning so far over the bench he was almost standing. "I am talking about the difference between reality and what Mrs. Vance wishes was reality," I said. "I am talking about the fact that this entire lawsuit is built on a foundation of data that does not exist." I turned to the bailiff. "Mr. Miller," I said, "I believe we stopped reading the list at item number 3. Would you please continue? I think the court needs to hear what is listed at item number 4, and more importantly, item number 5. Elena stood up again. "No!" she cried out. It was an involuntary reflex. She didn't even know why she was shouting. She just knew with the instinct of a trapped animal that something terrible was about to happen. "Read it, Mr. Miller," Judge Harrison ordered. Mr. Miller adjusted his glasses. He looked at the list. He looked at me. Then he began to read. "Item 4, Miller's voice boomed. "A collection of antique horological instruments and timepieces currently stored in a secure climate-controlled underground vault at an undisclosed location valued at approximately $2 million. I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. $2 million, I repeated. That is a lot of money. It is certainly enough to make a greedy woman hire a lawyer and commit a felony. I looked at the judge. There is just one problem, Your Honor. I do not have a vault. I do not have a $2 million collection. I rent a one-bedroom apartment and I drive a 10-year-old car. That vault only exists in one place. I tapped the side of my head. And on a decoy file I planted on my computer for a spy to find. Elena let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She slumped back into her chair. She was beginning to understand. She was beginning to see the bars of the cage closing in. But that is just the appetizer, I said. Item number 5 is the main course. Item number 5 is the reason she is really here. I nodded to Miller. Read item 5, please. The room went dead silent. Even the air conditioner seemed to hold its breath. We were at the precipice, and I was about to push her off. Judge Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, the wood creaking under the weight of his authority. He gestured with a weary hand toward the bailiff, Mr. Miller, who was standing like a sentry beside the witness stand. The air in the courtroom had shifted from the chaotic energy of the audio recording to a cold, clinical focus on the paperwork. We were no longer arguing about emotions or family dynamics. We were arguing about the hard, cold reality of a list. Mr. Miller, the judge said, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. Please read the entire asset schedule attached to the plaintiff's affidavit. Let us hear exactly what Mrs. Vance is claiming rights to. Mr. Miller adjusted his spectacles. He was a man who took his job seriously, reading every word with the flat, emotionless cadence of a machine. He held the document up to the light, clearing his throat with a dry cough that sounded like sandpaper on wood. Asset Schedule A, Miller read. Attached to the emergency petition for conservatorship. Item 1. He paused, squinting at the fine print. Real property located at 412 Oak Street, Apartment 4B. Estimated market value $450,000. I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table in front of me. This was correct. It was my apartment. It was the only home I had known for the last 5 years. It was modest, filled with books and spare parts, but it was mine. Elena nodded from her table. She sat up a little straighter. She smoothed the fabric of her white skirt, regaining some of the composure she had lost during the audio recording. This was safe ground for her. Real estate, tangible assets. She knew about the apartment. She had been there once, wrinkling her nose at the smell of oil and old brass. Item 2, Miller continued. Commercial leasehold and physical inventory, located at 889 Industrial Way. Doing business as Williams Horology. Estimated value of equipment and stock, $120,000. Again, correct. This was my workshop, my sanctuary. Elena looked over at Blackwood and whispered something. I could see the tension leaving her shoulders. She was thinking that perhaps the audio recording was just a blip. She was thinking that the judge would see this list, this comprehensive, detailed list, and realize that she had done her homework. She was proving she knew my life better than I did. She was proving she was the responsible one. Item 3, Miller read. Cash savings and checking accounts held at First National Bank. Account numbers ending in 455 and 992. Total combined balance as of January 30th. $18,420.50. Elena allowed a small, smug smile to touch her lips. She looked at the judge, communicating silently. See? I know exactly how much he has. I am monitoring him. I am on top of this. It was a seductive narrative. The competent stepmother stepping in to manage the chaotic finances of the stepson. The list felt authoritative. It felt real. Every item so far had been a truth grounded in the physical world. It lulled everyone into a sense of factual security. Then, Mr. Miller turned the page. The sound of the paper flipping was loud in the quiet room. Item 4, Miller announced. He paused. He looked closely at the paper, as if checking to make sure he was reading it correctly. He looked up at the judge, then back down at the page. Item 4, he repeated, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. A private collection of antique horological masterpieces, including 3 Breguet pocket watches and 2 Patek Philippe complications. Currently stored in a high-security underground vault at the Guardian Storage Facility Unit Number 77 Bravo. Miller took a breath before delivering the final line of the entry. Estimated market value $2 million. The words hung in the air like a heavy curtain. $2 million. A gasp went through the gallery. The reporters in the back row sat up, their pens poised. $2 million changed the story. It turned a sad little probate dispute into a high-stakes treasure hunt. It transformed me from a struggling watchmaker into a secret millionaire hoarding wealth, while his stepmother worried about his grocery bills. Elena was beaming. This was her ace in the hole. This was the secret she thought she had uncovered, the proof that I was hiding assets, the proof that I was deceitful. She looked at me with a mixture of triumph and greed. She believed that vault existed. She believed it with every fiber of her being because she had seen the file on my computer. She had seen the appraisal documents. She had seen the photos. Arthur Blackwood stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked revitalized. The embarrassment of the audio tape was forgotten. Now, he was the hunter again. Your Honor, Blackwood said, his voice booming with renewed confidence. This is the crux of our argument. Mr. Williams is crying poverty. He is crying about privacy. Yet he is sitting on a $2 million fortune in a storage unit while his family legacy crumbles. He has hidden this asset from the court. He has hidden it from the tax authorities. If Mrs. Vance had not been diligent in her investigation, this fortune would have vanished. Blackwood gestured toward me, an accusatory sweep of his arm. He claims he is just a humble craftsman. But a humble craftsman does not have a secret vault with $2 million worth of Swiss gold in it. This proves he is not only a liar, but a sophisticated one. We need immediate control of that unit, Your Honor, before he moves the contents. Judge Harrison looked at me. His eyes were hard. Hiding assets from a court was a serious offense. If I had a $2 million vault that I hadn't disclosed, I was in deep trouble. Mr. Williams, the judge said, do you have a response to item 4? I stood up. I did not look panicked. I did not look guilty. I looked at Mr. Miller. Then I looked at the judge. Your Honor, I said quietly, I would like to state for the record, under penalty of perjury, that I do not own 3 Breguet pocket watches. I do not own 2 Patek Philippe complications. I paused. And I certainly do not own a vault at Guardian Storage Facility. Elena scoffed audibly. He is lying, she hissed. Mr. Williams, the judge said, frowning, you are under oath. Are you denying the existence of these assets? I am denying their existence in the physical world, Your Honor, I said. I am telling you that item 4 is a work of fiction. Blackwood laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound. Fiction. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We have the inventory list. We have the location. Guardian Storage. Unit 77 Bravo. He is just trying to stall so he can get there first. Mr. Blackwood, I said, turning to face him. Have you been to Guardian Storage? Blackwood sneered. We didn't need to go there. We have the records. Have you called them? I asked. Have you verified that Unit 77 Bravo even exists? We have the documents from your own files, Blackwood shouted, waving a hand at the judge. Your Honor, this is absurd. He is denying reality. No, I said, my voice cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. I am denying your version of reality. Because you didn't check. You didn't do your due diligence. You just took what you found, and you ran with it. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, Guardian Storage does exist. It is a real facility on the north side of town. But if you call them right now, and I invite the court to do so, They will tell you two things. I held up two fingers. First, they will tell you that they do not have a client named Charles Williams. And second, they will tell you that their facility only has one floor. It is a ground-level warehouse. They do not have an underground vault. I took a step closer to the bench. And they definitely do not have a unit number 77 Bravo. Their units are numbered 1 to 500. They use numbers, not military alphabet codes. The silence returned, but this time it was a confused silence. Blackwood looked at his papers. He flipped through them frantically. "But we have the lease agreement," he muttered. "It's right here." "Yes," I said. "You have a PDF file labeled Vault Lease Agreement. You found it in a folder named Personal Finances on my laptop. It looks very official. It has a logo, it has a stamp." I leaned against the table, looking directly at Elena. Her face had gone pale again. The triumph was draining away, replaced by a creeping dread. "I made that file in Photoshop on a rainy Sunday afternoon in November," I said. "I created the logo. I made up the unit number. 77 Bravo. Do you know why I chose that number, Elena?" She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, unable to speak. 77, I said. 1977. The year you met my father. And Bravo. May, because you were such a good actress. I thought you deserved a round of applause. "Objection!" Blackwood shouted, but his voice lacked force. "Relevance." "The relevance, Your Honor," I said, turning back to Harrison, "is that item 4 is a trap. It is a canary trap. In espionage, when you suspect you have a leak, you feed different versions of false information to different people to see which version leaks out. In this case, I suspected I was being watched by a specific person, so I created a specific piece of false information." I walked over to the bailiff and took the list from his hand for a moment, pointing to item 4. "I placed this fake lease and the fake appraisal for the $2 million collection in a folder that was encrypted, but with a password that was easy to guess if you knew my birthday. I left it there waiting." I looked at the judge. "This asset does not exist. I have never been to Guardian Storage. I do not have $2 million. The only place this vault exists is on the hard drive of my computer and in the stolen files currently in Mrs. Vance's possession." Judge Harrison looked at Blackwood. The judge's face was dark with anger. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, "do you have independent verification of this asset? Did your firm send an investigator to the storage facility? Did you subpoena the bank for the rental payments?" Blackwood opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked like a fish gasping for air. "My client assured me the data was solid. She provided the documents." "So you filed a sworn affidavit to seize an asset based solely on a document obtained via illegal hacking without verifying if the asset was real?" the judge asked. "If we were under time constraints, Your Honor," Blackwood stammered. "You are telling me," the judge said, his voice rising, "that you are asking this court to give you custody of a non-existent room full of imaginary watches?" "We believed it was real," Elena cried out. She stood up, knocking her chair back. "It looked real. He tricked me. He put it there to trick me." "Exactly," I said. The word hung there. "He tricked me," Elena repeated, and then she stopped. Her hands flew to her mouth. She realized what she had just said. By admitting I had tricked her with a file on my computer, she had just confessed, in open court on the record, that she had accessed my computer, read the file, and used it to draft this legal petition. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," I said calmly. "That is the confirmation we needed." I looked at the judge. "Item 4 is proof of two things, Your Honor. First, it proves that the petitioner has no actual knowledge of my finances and is relying entirely on stolen data. And second, it proves that the data she stole is compromised. If item 4 is a lie, then the entire premise of her argument, that she knows what is best for my estate, is based on a hallucination. Judge Harrison took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose hard. He looked at the list in front of him with disdain. "Mr. Miller," the judge said wearily, "strike item 4 from the record. It appears we are litigating over ghost stories." The judge looked at Elena, who was now trembling her face, a mask of shock. She had walked in here thinking she was seizing a treasure chest. Instead, she had just grabbed a handful of smoke and revealed her own crime in the process. "But we are not done," I said. Because Mrs. Vance did not stop at the vault. She was thorough. She wanted everything. And that greed led her to item 5. I nodded to Miller. "Please, read the next item, Mr. Miller. This is the one that matters." Miller looked at the paper. He hesitated. The confidence he had at the beginning of the list was gone. He looked at the text as if it might bite him. "Item 5, Miller read. He stopped. He squinted. "Rights to the proprietary assets and access codes for the offshore trust designated as—" Miller paused again. He looked up at me. There was confusion in his eyes. "Designated as Project Bluebird," Miller finished. At the sound of those 2 words, Project Bluebird, Elena Vance did not just pale. She stopped breathing. She froze like a statue carved from ice. Her eyes, which had been darting around the room in panic, suddenly locked onto nothingness. She knew that name, and she knew, deep down in the dark pit of her stomach, that listing it here was the mistake that would end her. "Project Bluebird," Judge Harrison repeated. "Is this another imaginary vault, Mr. Williams?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Project Bluebird is very real. But it is not a trust, and it is certainly not an asset." I walked back to my table and sat down. I opened my notebook. I looked at Elena. "It is a folder," I said, "and we are about to open it." The bailiff, Mr. Miller, was a creature of habit. For the last 20 minutes, his voice had been a rhythmic drone, a flat instrument designed to convey information without coloring it with emotion. He had read about the apartment, the workshop, and the bank accounts with the same level of disinterest he might have used to read a grocery list. But when his eyes dropped to the bottom of the page, to the final entry, designated as Item 5, the rhythm broke. It was not a subtle pause. It was a full stop. Miller squinted. He adjusted the wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. He tilted the paper toward the overhead fluorescent lights, as if he suspected a printing error or a smudge of ink had distorted the words. Then he looked up at the bench. He did not look at me, and he did not look at the plaintiff. He looked directly at Judge Harrison with an expression of mild bewilderment, mixed with professional discomfort. The silence that descended on courtroom 4B was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. The earlier murmurs from the gallery had died out completely. The scratching of the court reporter's machine ceased. The only sound remaining was the ceiling fan revolving slowly overhead, whoosh, 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 cutting through the stagnant air like a dull blade. I sat with my back straight, my hands resting loosely on the table. I did not breathe. I was watching the back of Elena's neck. I saw a single muscle spasm near her shoulder blade. She knew. Even before the words were spoken, she knew the hammer was about to fall. "Is there a problem, Mr. Miller?" Judge Harrison asked. His voice was sharp, cutting through the thick atmosphere. He leaned forward, his black robe rustling. "We are waiting. Please read the item clearly for the record." Miller cleared his throat. It was a nervous sound, a sharp harumph that echoed in the quiet room. He looked back down at the paper, resigning himself to the text. Item 5. Miller read, his voice slightly higher pitched than before. Full ownership rights, administrative privileges, and digital access codes to the Offshore Asset Protection Trust, domiciled in the Canary Islands, designated as... He paused again, just for a fraction of a second, as if the name itself was strange to his tongue. Designated as Project Bluebird. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. From the plaintiff's table, there was a sharp clatter. Elena Vance had dropped her pen. It hit the hardwood floor, with a sound like a gunshot in a library rolling away under the table. But Elena did not bend down to retrieve it. She did not move. She sat frozen, her posture rigid, her face draining of color, so rapidly it looked as though the blood was being siphoned out of her body by an invisible tube. Her hands, which had been resting on the table, in a pose of elegant composure, began to tremble. It started as a fine vibration in her fingers, and quickly escalated until her entire arm was shaking. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning bone white, as if she were the only thing keeping herself from sliding off the face of the earth. Arthur Blackwood looked at her confused. He saw her terror, but he did not understand the source. He thought she was reacting to the exposure of a secret asset. He thought she was afraid of the tax implications of an offshore trust. He leaned in, whispering something urgent, likely advising her to stay calm. But she did not hear him. Her eyes were fixed on the empty space in front of her, staring at a ghost. I allowed myself to smile. It was the first time I had smiled since walking into the courthouse that morning. It was not a smile of joy. It was not a smile of relief. It was a cold, sharp expression, the baring of teeth that happens right before the trap snaps shut. "Project Bluebird," Judge Harrison repeated. He took off his glasses and looked at me. His expression was severe. "Mr. Williams, this court takes a very dim view of hidden offshore assets. If you have a trust in the Canary Islands that you failed to disclose during the initial probate hearings, you are looking at significant legal exposure." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket slowly, deliberately. I wanted every eye in the room to be on me. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and resonating with a new kind of power, "I do not have a trust in the Canary Islands. I have never been to the Canary Islands. I do not have a bank account, a shell company, or a stash of gold bars hidden in the tropics." "Mr. Blackwood has listed it here on a sworn affidavit," the judge countered, pointing a finger at the document. "He lists specific access codes. Are you saying he pulled this name out of thin air?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Mr. Blackwood did not pull it out of thin air, and neither did Mrs. Vance." I stepped out from behind the defense table. I walked to the center of the room, standing in the open floor between the judge and the woman who had tried to destroy me. "I know exactly what Project Bluebird is," I said, "and I know exactly where it exists." I turned to look at Elena. She finally met my gaze. Her eyes were wide, glassy with panic. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck that had lost its brakes. "Project Bluebird is not an asset, Your Honor," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "It is a directory. It is the name of a specific encrypted folder located on a private, secure server that I maintain for my business data backups." Judge Harrison frowned. "A folder? I don't understand. Why is it listed as a trust?" "Because that is what I labeled it," I explained. "I created a file inside that folder, a text document. I gave it a very boring bureaucratic name. asset_allocation_schedule_offshore.pdf. And inside that document I wrote a fiction. I invented a trust fund. I invented a balance of $5 million. I invented account numbers that do not exist." "Why?" the judge asked. "Why would you create a fake record of an illegal offshore account?" "To catch a thief," I said. The murmuring in the gallery started again, louder this time. The reporters were typing furiously. "Your Honor," I continued pacing slowly. "Earlier, we discussed the keylogger on my laptop. That was a passive surveillance tool. It watched what I did. But I knew that if Mrs. Vance was desperate enough, she would not be satisfied with just watching. She would want to take. She would want to dig deeper." I pointed to the blue envelope that was still sitting on the judge's bench. "My laptop is one thing, but my server, my private cloud server where I keep my client designs and my personal archives, is a fortress. It is protected by two-factor authentication, a hardware firewall, and 256-bit encryption. You cannot accidentally stumble into it. You cannot see it with a simple piece of spyware. To get inside that server, you have to break in. You have to actively hack it. I looked at Blackwood. He had stopped whispering. He was staring at me, with his mouth slightly open, the realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. The folder named Project Bluebird was created exactly 18 hours ago, I said. I created it yesterday afternoon, Sunday at 4 o'clock. I placed it in the deepest, most secure subdirectory of my server. I gave it a name that would be irresistible to someone looking for hidden money. Bluebird, my father's favorite song. Elena let out a small, strangled sob. There is absolutely no way for anyone to know that folder exists, I said, raising my voice to fill the room. Unless they breached my server, unless they bypassed the firewall, unless they used a brute-force decryption attack to crack the password. I walked back to the bailiff and pointed at the paper in his hand. Look at the timestamp on the affidavit, Mr. Miller. When was this list filed with the court? Miller looked at the stamp on the top corner of the document. Filed this morning at 8:30 a.m., he read. 8:30 this morning, I repeated. And the folder was created yesterday at 4 p.m. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, the math is simple. Between 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon and 8 o'clock this morning, someone committed a federal cybercrime. Someone hacked into my private server, located the new folder, decrypted the file, read the fake information about the Canary Islands Trust, and then, in a display of arrogance I still struggle to comprehend, copied that fake information directly into a sworn legal document and handed it to you. The judge looked at Elena. His face was no longer just angry. It was thunderous. He looked like a man who had just watched a murder committed in his presence. Mrs. Vance, Judge Harrison said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Elena tried to stand up, but her legs wouldn't support her. She slumped back down. I didn't, she stammered. Her voice was thin, reedy. You didn't do that, the judge asked. You didn't list it. It is right here. You signed it. My advisors. She tried to deflect, looking at Blackwood. Blackwood recoiled from her, as if she were radioactive. He stood up and took a literal step away from the table. Do not drag me into this, Elena, Blackwood snapped, his voice shaking with fury. You told me you had these documents from your husband's old files. You told me this was legacy paperwork. You did not tell me you hacked a server last night. I had to know, Elena screamed. The facade shattered completely. The tears were real now, but they were tears of rage and terror. He was hiding things from me. I knew he had money. I saw the folder. I saw the $5 million. It's mine. It belongs to the family. It doesn't exist, I shouted back at her. There is no money, Elena. It was a test. And you failed. The room was in chaos. The judge was banging his gavel, but the sound was barely audible over the noise of the gallery. Order! Harrison roared. Order in this court! The noise subsided, but the tension remained vibrating in the air. Let the record show, I said, my voice cutting through the remaining hum, that the petitioner has just admitted in open court to accessing the Project Bluebird file. Since that file exists only on a secured server and was created less than 24 hours ago, her admission is a confession to a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. She has also confessed to presenting falsified evidence to this court, as the asset she is claiming does not exist. I looked at Blackwood. He looked sick. He knew exactly what this meant. This wasn't just a lost case. This was disbarment territory if he wasn't careful. This was prison time for his client. Mr. Williams, Judge Harrison said. He was rubbing his temples. You are telling me that this entire item, this Canary Islands Trust, is a trap you set? Yes, Your Honor, I said. I knew she would come for me. I knew she would try to take everything. So I gave her something to take. I gave her a poisoned apple, and she took a bite. Elena was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. The proud, shark-like woman who had walked in here an hour ago was gone. In her place was a criminal who had been caught red-handed, holding the smoking gun of her own greed. "This document," the judge said, holding up the asset schedule, "is no longer a petition for guardianship. It is a signed confession of industrial espionage." He looked at the bailiff. "Mr. Miller, secure the doors. No one leaves this courtroom." Elena's head snapped up. "What? No, you can't." "I can, and I will," Judge Harrison said. "Mr. Blackwood, sit down and be quiet. Mr. Williams, you have made your point. And you have made it with devastating clarity." I sat down. I took a sip of water from my thermos. It was cold now, but it tasted like the finest champagne. I watched Elena Vance. She was looking at the exit signs, her eyes darting back and forth, realizing that the cage I had built was not made of bars, but of her own lies. And the lock had just clicked shut. "Project Bluebird," I whispered to myself. "Mission accomplished." Arthur Blackwood was a man accustomed to controlling the narrative, but he was watching his career evaporate in real time. He slammed his hand onto the defense table, the sound echoing sharply against the wood paneling. "Objection!" Blackwood shouted, his voice cracking with a desperation that was painful to witness. "Your Honor, this is entrapment. The respondent admits to creating a false file with the specific intention of deceiving my client. This is a setup. He manufactured this entire situation to humiliate Mrs. Vance." Judge Harrison did not bang his gavel. He did not need to. He simply leaned forward, his face a mask of stone, and stared at the lawyer until Blackwood stopped talking. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge said, his voice deceptively calm. "Let us be very clear about the definition of entrapment. Entrapment occurs when law enforcement induces a person to commit a crime they would not have otherwise committed. Mr. Williams is not a police officer. And more importantly, he did not force your client to type in a password, bypass a firewall, and download a file from a private server." The judge gestured to the empty space where the Project Bluebird Trust should have been. "If I leave my front door unlocked and a thief walks in and steals my television, that is burglary. If I put a sign on my lawn saying, 'Free gold inside,' and a thief breaks in to find nothing that is still breaking and entering, the fact that the gold was fake does not excuse the break-in." Harrison turned his gaze to Elena. "If your client did not break into that server, Mr. Blackwood, then how did she know the name Project Bluebird to write it on this affidavit? Did she guess it? Did it come to her in a dream?" Blackwood opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Elena, pleading silently for an explanation that would save them both. But Elena was catatonic, staring at the table, her fingernails digging into the wood. "I have the answer to that question, Your Honor," I said. I reached into my briefcase for the final time. I pulled out a third envelope. This one was red. "Exhibit C," I announced. The final piece of the puzzle. I walked to the bench. The movement felt automatic now, like the gears of a clock clicking into their final position. I handed the red envelope to Mr. Miller. The blue envelope contained the logs from the keylogger on my laptop, I explained to the room. That showed intent, but this envelope, this contains the server logs from my private cloud storage. These are the digital footprints of the crime itself. Judge Harrison opened the envelope. He pulled out a single sheet of paper printed with lines of dense code. "Mr. Williams," the judge said, scanning the page, "translate this for the court." "Line 4, I said, reciting it from memory. "Timestamp, 200 hours, 14 minutes, and 30 seconds. Date, February 1st. That was 2 o'clock this morning, Your Honor." I turned to face the gallery. At 2 in the morning, while most honest people were sleeping, an external connection request hit my server's firewall. It originated from a residential IP address, 68.142.11.7. I pointed to the paper in the judge's hand. "If you look at the second document in that envelope, Your Honor, You will see a subpoena compliance record from Comcast Internet Services obtained via an emergency motion I filed myself last week in anticipation of this event. That IP address is registered to the primary residence of Mrs. Elena Vance. Elena flinched. The number was like a serial number on a weapon, found at a murder scene. It tied her physically to the act. The log shows a brute force attack on the password, I continued. 42 failed attempts in 3 minutes, and then 1 successful login. She didn't guess the password, Your Honor. She used the administrative override code that she found in my father's old diary, a code I had deliberately left active on that specific folder, knowing she was the only other person on Earth who knew it. She accessed the folder, the judge read from the log. She opened asset_allocation_schedule_offshore.pdf. She downloaded it. Precisely, I said. She downloaded a lie. And 6 hours later she filed it as truth in this courtroom. Blackwood sank into his chair. He was no longer looking at the judge. He was looking at his own briefcase, likely calculating how quickly he could distance himself from his client without getting disbarred. "But, Your Honor," I said, my voice dropping to a lower, more intimate register. "Digital logs are cold. They are just numbers on a page. And Mrs. Vance is a woman who relies on appearances. She relies on her image. So I think it is only fair that we see the face of the person who committed this crime." "What do you mean?" Judge Harrison asked. 2 years ago, I said, turning to look at Elena. "Mrs. Vance went to Paris for a month. She asked me to keep an eye on the house. She gave me administrative access to her home security system, the cameras in the living room, the hallway, and the study. She wanted me to check in and make sure the maids were doing their job." Elena's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. She had forgotten. In her arrogance, in her belief that I was nothing more than a servant to her needs, she had forgotten she had given me the keys to her castle. "She never revoked the access," I said. "I never used it. I respected her privacy. Until last night." I signaled to the bailiff. "Mr. Miller, if you would please connect my drive to the main display." The screen descended again. The courtroom lights dimmed. The hum of the projector was the loudest thing in the world. A video feed appeared on the screen. It was grainy, black and white night vision, but the image was unmistakable. It was the study in the Vance mansion. I knew that room. My father used to read to me in that leather armchair. Now, it was Elena's command center. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14:30 a.m. The figure in the video was Elena Vance. But it was not the Elena sitting in the courtroom. This was not the poised socialite in the $5,000 suit. The woman on the screen was wearing a silk bathrobe that was falling off one shoulder. Her hair was a tangled mess. She was not sitting elegantly. She was hunched over the computer keyboard, her face illuminated by the harsh blue glow of the monitor. She looked manic. On the video, she typed furiously. Then she stopped. She clapped her hand over her mouth. She did a little shimmy in the chair, a dance of pure, unadulterated greed. "Look at her," I said softly. The Elena on the screen grabbed a notepad. She started scribbling, looking back and forth between the screen and the paper. She was writing down the fake account numbers. She was writing down the details of Project Bluebird. Then she did something that made the entire courtroom gasp. The video, Elena picked up her phone. She dialed a number. On the screen, she was laughing. It was a wild, unhinged look. She was talking rapidly, gesturing at the screen. "We can't hear the audio," I narrated. "But we don't need to. She is calling someone to tell them she found the jackpot. She thinks she has won." The video ended, with her hugging the notepad to her chest, spinning around in the chair, her face twisted into a rictus of triumph that looked demonic in the night vision shadows. The screen went black. The lights came back on. The contrast was devastating. The woman sitting at the plaintiff's table looked small, withered, and exposed. The video had stripped away her armor. It had shown everyone the ugly, grasping soul beneath the designer clothes. She wasn't a concerned mother. She was a thief in the night, salivating over money that didn't belong to her. Arthur Blackwood was packing his bag. He was doing it quietly, methodically. He put his pens away. He closed his folder. He did not look at Elena. "Mr. Blackwood?" Judge Harrison asked. "I have no defense for this, Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice hollow. "I was not aware of the existence of this video nor the method by which the information was obtained. If I had known, I would never have filed this petition." "You are withdrawing?" the judge asked. "I am withdrawing my representation of Mrs. Vance, effective immediately," Blackwood said. "I cannot ethically represent a client who uses my firm to facilitate criminal fraud." He stood up, picked up his briefcase, and walked out. He didn't look back. The heavy door swung shut behind him with a finality that echoed like a tomb closing. Elena was alone. She looked at the empty chair beside her. Then she looked at the judge. Then she looked at me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the cornered animal instinct that had driven her for years. Her face twisted. The beautiful features contorted into a snarl. "You bastard!" she screamed. She leaped to her feet, knocking her heavy oak chair backward. It crashed to the floor. "You set me up!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You planned this. You put that file there for me to find. You knew I would look. You tempted me." "Mrs. Vance, sit down," Judge Harrison bellowed, banging his gavel. "He is the criminal," Elena yelled, ignoring the judge. She was unraveling completely. "He is sick. Who does that? Who makes up a fake trust fund just to trap his own mother? You are a psychopath, Charles. Path. You are evil." I stood my ground. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. "I am not your son, Elena," I said calmly. "And you are not my mother. You are a woman who broke into my house, hacked my computer, and tried to steal my life. I didn't make you click that mouse. I didn't make you type that password. You did that all by yourself." "It's a trap," she screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "It's a trap. It's not fair." "Fairness, Judge Harrison," said his voice cutting through her hysteria like a blade of ice, "is not what you should be worried about right now, Mrs. Vance." Elena froze. She looked at the judge. "You just shouted to the entire court that Mr. Williams put that file there for you to find," the judge said. "You just admitted again that you found the file. You admitted you accessed it. You admitted you believed it was real." The judge leaned forward, his eyes boring into her. "You are arguing that because the money was fake, your crime is fake. Let me disabuse you of that notion immediately. Attempted grand larceny is still a felony. Computer fraud is still a felony. Perjury is still a felony." Elena's mouth opened and closed. She looked around for Blackwood, but he was gone. She was alone on the island she had built. "You wanted to prove Mr. Williams was incompetent," Judge Harrison continued. "Instead, you have proved he is the only person in this family with any integrity. And you have proved yourself to be a common criminal." "But I am Elena Vance," she whispered, as if her name was a magic spell that should protect her. "I own half this city." "Not anymore," I said. I looked at her one last time. I saw the realization hit her. It wasn't just the lawsuit. It was everything. The reputation she had spent decades building, the social standing, the board memberships, the charity galas. It was all burning down, ignited by a single timestamp on a server log. "Your Honor," I said. "The defense rests." I sat down. The silence in the room was no longer heavy. It was clear. It was the clean, sharp silence of a storm that is finally broken. The air felt lighter. I looked at my watch. It was 10:45 in the morning. It had taken less than 2 hours to dismantle a lifetime of lies. The courtroom was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a crash site. The air felt thin, ionized by the sheer voltage of the revelation that had just taken place. Elena Vance was slumped in her chair, a ruin of a woman surrounded by the wreckage of her own arrogance. She had admitted to the hack. She had admitted to the lie. Most people would have stopped there. Most people would have taken the victory, packed up their briefcase, and gone home to celebrate. But I was not most people. And I was not done. I looked at the bailiff, Mr. Miller. He was holding the asset list loosely in his hand, looking at it with a mixture of confusion and distaste, as if the paper itself had become dirty. "Mr. Miller," I said, my voice breaking the silence gently. "Before we close the book on Exhibit A, there is one small detail we overlooked. A detail that explains everything." Judge Harrison looked up. He looked exhausted. "Mr. Williams, you have proven she hacked the server. You have proven the assets are fake. What more is there?" "The motive, Your Honor," I said. "We have established the how. We have established what. But we have not yet established the why." I walked over to the bailiff. I pointed to a small handwritten annotation in the margin of the document right next to Item 5, the entry for the fictitious Project Bluebird. "Mrs. Vance was in a hurry when she printed this," I said. "She was panicked. She was excited. And in her haste, she didn't just copy the asset name. She copied the note she made to herself while she was reviewing the stolen file." I nodded to Miller. "Please read the handwritten note in the right-hand margin next to the trust designation." Miller squinted. The handwriting was jagged, scrawled in black ink, the pressure of the pen clearly visible, even on the photocopy. "It says," Miller paused to decipher the script, "it says, must be destroyed immediately upon transfer of custody. Priority 1. Elena made a sound. It was a low moan like an animal trapped in a snare. She knew what was coming. She knew that this was the final nail, and it was going to be driven through her heart. "Destroyed immediately," I repeated. "Priority 1. I turned to the judge. "Your Honor, ask yourself this question. Why would a woman worth $50 million risk a federal prison sentence for a fake trust fund worth $5 million? Greed? Perhaps. But Elena Vance is not a gambler. She is a calculator. She doesn't take risks unless the alternative is worse." I walked back to the center of the room. "She didn't want the money in Project Bluebird," I said. "She wanted what was attached to the money." I opened my notebook to a fresh page. Inside the Project Bluebird folder on my server, alongside the fake financial statement, I placed a second document, a PDF file. I titled it, Vance and Partners Internal Audit 1998 to 2005, Unreported Income and Offshore Tax Shelters. The color that had been slowly returning to Elena's face vanished again. She looked like a ghost. "That is what she found," I said. "She didn't just find a pot of gold. She found what she believed was a smoking gun. She found a document, a completely fabricated document, I might add, that detailed a system of illegal tax evasion, allegedly orchestrated by my late father and continued by her." I looked at the gallery. The reporters were leaning forward so far they were almost falling out of their seats. This was the scandal they had been waiting for. "If that document were real," I explained, "it would destroy Vance and Partners. It would lead to IRS raids, SEC investigations, and prison time for the entire board of directors, including Elena. She saw that file at 2 a.m. and she didn't see an inheritance. She saw her own destruction." I turned back to the judge. "That is why she filed for emergency guardianship, Your Honor. That is why she couldn't wait. That is why she came here this morning with a team of lawyers and a sob story about my mental health. She needed legal control of my assets today, not to spend the money, but to get the legal right to seize my server, access the hard drive, and delete that file before anyone else saw it." I pointed to the note on the paper in Miller's hand. "Destroy immediately." That is not the note of a beneficiary. That is the note of a co-conspirator cleaning up a crime scene. Judge Harrison looked at the paper, then at Elena. His expression had shifted from anger to a profound, chilly disappointment. "So," the judge said, his voice heavy, "you are telling me that this petition was an instrument of obstruction. The petitioner was using this court as a shredder." "Exactly, Your Honor," I said. "She was attempting to use the authority of the Superior Court to facilitate the destruction of evidence. She thought she was covering up a decade of tax fraud. In doing so, she committed a very real crime: conspiracy to obstruct justice and spoliation of evidence." Elena was shaking her head. "I had to," she whispered. "I had to protect the company. It was his legacy." "And that," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream, "is the saddest part of all." I walked over to the plaintiff's table. I stood 3 feet away from her. I could smell the expensive perfume that had seemed so overpowering this morning. Now, it just smelled like something trying to mask the scent of decay. "There was no tax fraud, Elena," I said gently. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed with smeared mascara. "What?" "The document was fake," I said. "Just like the vault, just like the trust fund. Dad never evaded taxes. He never hid money in the Cayman Islands. He was the most honest man I ever knew. He paid every single cent he owed to the government on time every year." Elena stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly. "But the file, it looked so real." "I made it look real because I knew you," I said. "I knew that deep down you never really trusted him. You never believed that someone could be successful without being corrupt. You projected your own morality onto him. You assumed that because you would cheat to get ahead, he must have cheated too." I took a breath. This was the part that hurt. Not for me, but for the memory of the man we had both lost. He loved you, Elena. He trusted you with everything. He left you the company because he thought you were strong. He didn't leave behind any blackmail files. He didn't leave behind any secrets. The only secret in that house was the one you created in your own mind." Elena looked as if I had physically struck her. The realization was washing over her wave after sickening wave. She had risked everything: her freedom, her reputation, her relationship with her stepson, to hide a crime that had never happened. She had destroyed herself to protect a ghost. "He was clean," she stammered. "He was spotless," I said. "You are the one who brought the dirt into the house." She let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a scream. It was the sound of a soul breaking. She slumped forward, her forehead hitting the polished wood of the table with a dull thud. Her shoulders heaved. She wasn't crying for the lawsuit anymore. She was crying because she finally saw the magnitude of her betrayal. She had betrayed my father, not just by attacking me, but by doubting him, by believing he was a criminal, by thinking so little of his character that she was ready to commit felonies to cover up his imaginary sins. The courtroom remained suspended in that moment of tragedy. It was no longer a legal battle. It was a Greek tragedy playing out under fluorescent lights. The stepmother, who was so consumed by her own reflection that she couldn't see the light in others. Judge Harrison watched her for a long moment. He did not offer pity. He offered judgment. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed. I have seen malice. I have seen stupidity. But I have never seen a case where a plaintiff walked into my courtroom and effectively framed themselves for a crime they were trying to cover up, only to find out the original crime was a figment of their own paranoid imagination." He stacked his papers together. The sound was final. "You have wasted the court's time. You have insulted the memory of your late husband. And you have proven yourself entirely unfit to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a multi-million-dollar estate." The judge turned his eyes to the door where Arthur Blackwood had paused. The lawyer was standing by the heavy wooden gate, his hand on the latch. He had heard everything. He looked pale, shaken. He knew that if he walked out that door without putting something on the record, his silence could be construed as complicity. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Harrison said, "do you have anything to add before I issue my ruling?" Blackwood stepped back into the well of the court. He did not look at Elena. He looked like a man trying to survive a shipwreck. "Your Honor," Blackwood said, his voice steady but strained, "I would like to formally move to withdraw as counsel for the petitioner effective immediately. My firm was provided with fraudulent documents. We were misled regarding the nature of the evidence and the motivation behind the filing. I cannot and will not be a party to the obstruction of justice." "Motion granted," Judge Harrison said instantly. "You are excused, Mr. Blackwood, and I suggest you contact your malpractice carrier. You are going to need them." Blackwood nodded. He picked up his briefcase. He walked out of the courtroom, his footsteps echoing on the tile floor of the hallway. He left Elena Vance alone at the table, a captain of industry who had just been abandoned by her last lifeboat. Elena did not look up as her lawyer left. She was still hunched over the table, her face buried in her arms. She was muttering something. I stepped closer to hear it. "I thought I was saving us," she whispered. "I thought I was saving us." "You were only saving yourself, Elena," I said softly. "And that is why you lost." I turned back to the judge. I felt a great weight lifting off my shoulders. The cage was locked. The key was thrown away. And the truth, the actual unvarnished truth about my father was safe. He wasn't the man she thought he was, and neither was I. "Mr. Williams," Judge Harrison said, "I believe I have heard enough. Are you ready for my ruling?" "I am, Your Honor," I said. I went back to my table. I sat down. I put my hand on the thermos of coffee. It was just an old thermos, dented and scratched. But in that moment it felt like a scepter. I had walked in here a pauper in the eyes of the law, and I was about to walk out a king. Not because of money, but because I knew who I was, and I knew who my father was. Elena Vance had neither of those things. She had nothing but a list of imaginary assets and a very real prison sentence waiting for her. Judge Harrison did not hesitate. He did not ask for a recess to deliberate. He did not consult a law book. He had seen enough. The transformation in his demeanor was absolute. If he had been a neutral arbiter at 9 o'clock, by 11 o'clock, he had become the sword of the state. He arranged the papers on his bench with a sharp, percussive rhythm, stacking the fake asset list, the server logs, and the transcript of Elena's confession into a neat pile. He looked down at Elena Vance. She was still slumped over the table, a portrait of defeated arrogance, but the judge did not offer her a moment to recover. "Stand up, Mrs. Vance," Judge Harrison ordered. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a granite slab. Elena struggled to her feet. She swayed slightly. She looked around for support, but her lawyer was gone, and the gallery, which had been filled with her potential admirers, was now a wall of hostile witnesses. She stood alone. "This court has heard the evidence." The judge began his words, clipping through the air with military precision. "We have heard the testimony of the respondent. We have seen the digital forensics. And most damning of all, we have heard the admission of guilt from the petitioner herself." He picked up his pen, hovering it over the court order form. "It is rare that a case resolves itself so completely in a preliminary hearing. Usually we have to sift through layers of ambiguity. But you, Mrs. Vance, have provided us with a clarity that is blinding. You came here seeking to use the power of the law as a weapon against your stepson. You sought to strip him of his property, his dignity, and his autonomy based on a fabrication that you yourself concocted out of paranoia and greed." The judge signed the first page with a flourish. "The petition for emergency conservatorship and asset guardianship filed by Elena Vance against Charles Williams is hereby dismissed with prejudice," Harrison declared. That means you can never bring this claim again. It is dead. It is buried." He flipped the page. "Furthermore, based on the threats recorded on the audio evidence and the confirmed illegal surveillance of the respondent's home and digital life, I am granting Mr. Williams's cross motion for a permanent restraining order. Mrs. Vance, you are hereby ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Mr. Williams, his residence, his place of business, and any other location he is known to frequent. This order is effective immediately and will remain in force for a period of 10 years. Elena opened her mouth to protest a weak sound escaping her throat, but the judge cut her off with a sharp look. "Do not speak," Harrison warned. "I am not finished." He looked at the bailiff, Mr. Miller, and then at the two uniformed deputies standing by the door. "The court finds that there is probable cause to believe that the petitioner has utilized her financial resources, specifically the accounts of Vance and partners, and her personal assets to facilitate the commission of multiple felonies, including wire fraud, unauthorized computer access, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." The judge looked directly at Elena. "Therefore, I am issuing a sua sponte order to freeze all personal and business assets under the control of Elena Vance, pending a full forensic accounting. You cannot move a dime, Mrs. Vance. You cannot transfer funds. You cannot sell stock. You cannot even buy a plane ticket. Your empire is on hold until we determine how much of it was used to finance this criminal enterprise." Elena gasped. This was the blow that actually hurt. The restraining order was an insult. The asset freeze was an amputation. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "You can't do that!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "That is my money! I have a company to run. You are destroying the business." "You destroyed the business the moment you decided to use its server to hack an innocent man," Judge Harrison replied coldly. "The freeze stays until the federal authorities say otherwise." He turned to the court clerk. "Transmit the entire case file, including all exhibits and the video recording of the break-in, to the Office of the District Attorney and the Cyber Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am formally referring this matter for criminal prosecution on charges of perjury, evidence tampering, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." The judge set his pen down. He folded his hands. "Deputies," he said, "take her into custody." The room erupted. The sudden shift from a civil hearing to a criminal arrest was shocking, even though we all saw it coming. The two uniformed officers moved from the back of the room. They walked with purpose, the jingle of their equipment belts the only sound cutting through the stunned murmurs of the crowd. Elena saw them coming. Her eyes went wide. The reality of the situation finally pierced the bubble of her delusion. She wasn't just losing a lawsuit. She was going to jail. "No!" she screamed. She backed away from the table, knocking over her chair again. "No, you can't touch me! Do you know who I am? I am Elena Vance. I am a victim here. He trapped me." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "Arrest him!" she yelled, her voice raw and hysterical. "He is the one who made the fake file. He is the one who tricked me. It is his fault." The first deputy reached her. He was a large man, impassive and professional. He took hold of her left arm. "Ma'am, place your hands behind your back," he said calmly. "Get off me!" Elena screamed. She tried to jerk her arm away. It was a pathetic, futile struggle. She flailed her $5,000 suit, twisting her perfect hair coming undone. "Don't you touch me! I will sue you! I will sue this entire city!" The second deputy grabbed her other arm. They spun her around. The resistance was over in seconds. She was strong in a boardroom, but she had no power here. This was the world of physical consequences, a world she had thought she was above. I watched as she was pressed forward against the table, the same table where she had sat so smugly just 2 hours ago. I heard the distinct metallic click-click of the handcuffs engaging. It was a harsh, mechanical sound, the sound of finality. Elena was sobbing now. It wasn't the delicate, scenic crying she had performed earlier. This was ugly, guttural weeping. She was shouting profanities, a stream of venom directed at the judge, at the police, and mostly at me. "You ungrateful little rat," she screamed, twisting her head to look at me as the deputies hauled her upright. "I gave you everything. I let you live in that house. I tolerated your father's weakness. And this is how you repay me? I will kill you. I will destroy you." "That threat is noted for the record," Judge Harrison said dryly. "Add it to the file." The judge pointed to the purse and the laptop bag sitting on the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Miller," the judge ordered, "seize those devices. The laptop and the smartphone belonging to the defendant are now evidence. Secure them immediately to prevent any remote wiping of data." Mr. Miller moved efficiently. He picked up the sleek silver laptop and the designer handbag containing her phone. Elena watched her digital lifeline being taken away, and she let out a wail of despair that echoed off the high ceiling. Without her phone, without her money, and without her freedom, she was nothing. She was just a woman in handcuffs who had played a game she didn't understand. The deputies began to march her toward the side exit, the door reserved for prisoners. She stumbled, her high heels slipping on the polished floor. She looked like a broken doll dragged along by the machinery of justice. As they passed the bailiff's station, Elena slowed down, digging her heels in for one last moment of resistance. She looked at Mr. Miller, the man who had read the list that doomed her. She looked at him with pleading eyes, as if he could somehow undo the last hour. "I didn't know," she sobbed to him. "I didn't know it was a trap." Mr. Miller looked at her. He held her laptop under one arm and the asset list in his other hand. He adjusted his glasses, his face completely neutral. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice low, but audible enough for me to hear from my table. "You should always read the fine print before you sign your life away," he signaled to the deputies. "Take her down." The deputies pushed the door open. Elena began to scream again, a long, incoherent sound of rage. But the heavy door swung shut, cutting off the noise abruptly. 1 second, the room was filled with her chaos. The next second, she was gone. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of a vacuum filling with air. Judge Harrison looked down at me. The hardness in his face softened just a fraction. He looked like a man who had just finished a dirty job and was ready to wash his hands. "Mr. Williams," the judge said. I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." "You took a significant risk today," Harrison said, "representing yourself against a firm like Blackwood's, setting a trap that could have backfired if she hadn't been quite so greedy. It was unconventional." "Necessity is the mother of invention, Your Honor," I replied. "Indeed," the judge said. He picked up his gavel. "You have your life back, son. I suggest you go and live it, and perhaps find a safer place to keep your server backups." "I will, Your Honor." "Court is adjourned," Harrison said. He banged the gavel once, a sharp wooden crack that signaled the end. The judge stood up and swept out of the room through his chamber's door. The court reporter stopped typing and began to pack up her equipment. The people in the gallery, the few stragglers who had come to watch a boring probate hearing and ended up witnessing a corporate takedown, began to shuffle out, whispering excitedly to each other. I stood there for a moment. I looked at the empty table across the aisle. The chair Elena had knocked over was still lying on its side. Her pen was still on the floor where she had dropped it. The ghost of her perfume still lingered faintly in the air, a sweet, sickly reminder of the morning. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the urge to cheer. I felt a deep, resonant exhaustion, the kind that comes after carrying a heavy load for miles and finally setting it down. I buttoned my jacket. I ran my hand over the lapel, smoothing the fabric. It was a cheap suit, but I wore it with a dignity that Elena's $5,000 outfit could never buy. I turned to my table. I picked up my thermos. I picked up the folder containing the real deeds to my workshop and my apartment, documents that were now safe from her grasping hands forever. I picked up the red, blue, and black envelopes that had served their purpose. I placed them all into my scuffed leather briefcase. The latch clicked shut, a solid, reliable sound. I looked at the empty space where Elena had stood. I thought about my father. I thought about how much he had loved her and how much she had despised him for his kindness. I thought about the lies she had lived and the truth I had just protected. I didn't say anything. There were no words left to say. The verdict had been delivered. The debt was paid. I gave a single, slow nod to the empty chair. It was a goodbye. Not just to her, but to the shadow she had cast over my life for the last 20 years. I turned around and walked down the center aisle. I pushed open the double doors at the back of the courtroom. The heavy wood gave way under my hand. I stepped out of the pressurized atmosphere of courtroom 4B and into the hallway. The air out there was different. It smelled of floor cleaner and coffee, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. I was free. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung shut behind me with a dull, resonant thud that felt like the closing of a tomb. I stood on the top step of the concrete stairs, blinking against the sudden brightness. Inside, the air had been recycled stale and heavy with the scent of floor wax and desperate lies. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. It smelled of city exhaust wet pavement and the faint, sweet aroma of roasted nuts from a vendor on the corner. It smelled like freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs until they ached. For 6 months, I had been holding my breath. For 6 months, I had been living in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the axe to fall, waiting for the woman who had promised to destroy me to make her move. Now, the move had been made. The game was over, and I was the one standing in the sunlight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It vibrated once, a short, sharp buzz against my palm. I looked at the screen. It was a notification from my home security system, the final automated script I had programmed to run the moment the legal order was filed. System alert. User profile. Elena Vance has been permanently removed from all authorized access lists. Biometric data deleted. Remote key codes invalidated. I stared at the message. It was just text on a screen, pixels and light, but it carried more weight than the stone pillars of the building behind me. It was the digital severing of the last cord that bound us. She could no longer see into my living room. She could no longer read my emails. She was gone, erased from my life as completely as if she had never existed. I walked down the steps, my movements slow and deliberate. I did not run. I did not shout. I walked to my car, a 10-year-old sedan that had seen better days, and unlocked the door. The leather seat was cold. The engine sputtered to life with a familiar rattle. I merged into the traffic, the city, moving around me in its chaotic, beautiful rhythm. People were rushing to lunch, yelling into their phones, jaywalking across the street. None of them knew that a multi-million-dollar empire had just crumbled a few blocks away. None of them knew that a woman in a $5,000 suit was currently sitting in a holding cell, stripped of her jewelry and her dignity. It was a humbling thought. The world does not stop for our tragedies or our victories. It just keeps spinning. I drove automatically, my hands, knowing the route by heart. I didn't go back to my apartment. I went to the only place that had ever truly felt like home. I parked in the alley behind the brick building on Industrial Way. I unlocked the metal door and stepped inside. The smell hit me instantly. A complex, comforting mixture of synthetic oil, old dust brass, and the faint, metallic tang of ozone. It was the smell of my workshop. It was the smell of patience. I flipped the switch and the overhead lights flickered on, illuminating the rows of workbenches, the cabinets filled with tiny drawers, and the walls lined with clocks of every shape and size. And then there was the sound. Tick, tock, tick, tock. 100 different heartbeats, all beating out of sync, creating a chaotic but soothing symphony. This was my choir. I took off my suit jacket and hung it on the hook by the door. I loosened my tie. I rolled up my sleeves. I washed my hands at the utility sink, scrubbing away the invisible grime of the courtroom. Then I sat down at my workbench. In the center of the green felt pad lay the project I had been neglecting for weeks. It was a 19th century pocket watch, a beautiful, complicated piece made by a master in London in 1882. It had come to me, broken its mainspring, snapped its balance wheel, seized. It was a hopeless case to most people. But I knew that with enough time, with enough care, it could be made to sing again. I put on my magnification loupe. I picked up my tweezers. My hands, which had been steady enough to hold the evidence that destroyed Elena, were even steadier now. I began to work. I focused on the microscopic teeth of a gear, on the delicate curve of a hairspring. The world outside fell away. There was no judge. There was no lawyer. There was only the problem and the solution, separated by hours of quiet labor. This was what Elena never understood. She wanted the results without the work. She wanted the fortune without the legacy. She thought power was something you seized, not something you built. She had tried to force the world to bend to her will, and it had snapped back and broken her. I was just a mechanic. I understood that you cannot force a broken thing to work. You have to understand why it broke, and then you have to fix it piece by piece. I worked for hours. The afternoon light faded, replaced by the warm glow of my desk lamp. Around 5 o'clock, I took a break. I turned on the small radio I kept on the shelf, tuning it to the local news station, while I poured myself a cup of coffee. The reporter's voice was urgent. Breaking news in the financial world this afternoon. Shares of Vance & Partners have plummeted nearly 40% in after-hours trading following the shocking arrest of CEO Elena Vance at the Superior Court earlier today. Sources say Vance was taken into custody on charges including wire fraud and perjury. The board of directors has called an emergency meeting and is expected to issue a statement later tonight distancing the company from Vance's personal legal troubles. I turned the radio off. 40%. Millions of dollars of value wiped out in an afternoon because one woman couldn't be satisfied with what she had. It was a waste. A colossal, tragic waste. My father had built that company to provide security, not to fuel a Greek tragedy. But I felt no guilt. I had not swung the wrecking ball. I had simply stepped out of the way and let gravity do its work. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the shop returning. My computer chimed with a new email. I hesitated. I didn't want to deal with lawyers anymore. But the subject line caught my eye. Subject: a letter from your father, to be delivered only when the dust settles. It was from Mr. Henderson, my father's personal attorney, a man who had retired 2 years ago. I clicked it open. There was no legal jargon, just a scanned image of a piece of yellow legal pad paper. The handwriting was familiar, the sprawling, jagged script of a man who thought faster than he could write. My throat tightened. Charles, if you are reading this, it means things with Elena have reached a breaking point. I hope I am wrong. I hope she finds peace, but I know her ambition is a fire that consumes everything it touches. I want you to know why I left the company to her and the workshop to you. It wasn't because I loved her more. It was because I knew you were the only one strong enough to live without the power. You have a gift, son. You can fix things. She can only acquire them. Do not let the money blind you. Do not let the fight turn you into her. The only wealth that matters is the ability to look in the mirror and, like the man staring back at you, be happy. Make things work. That is all I ever wanted. Love, Dad. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. A single tear rolled down my cheek, hot and fast. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. I had spent the last 6 months fighting to prove I wasn't the man Elena said I was. I had fought to prove I wasn't a gambler, a failure, a disappointment. But right here in this simple letter was the only verdict that mattered. My father knew. He had always known. He hadn't left me the workshop as a consolation prize. He had left it to me as a lifeboat. He knew the storm was coming, and he had given me the one place where I could ride it out safely. He hadn't left behind a secret file of tax fraud. He hadn't left behind a hidden vault of gold. He had left behind a blessing. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the window. The streetlights were coming on, casting long orange shadows across the pavement. I felt a sudden, overwhelming need to be outside, to be part of the living world. I turned off the desk lamp. I locked the front door of the shop, checking the handle twice out of habit. I walked down the street toward the small park at the end of the block. It was twilight. The air was cooling down. In the playground, a group of children were chasing each other, their laughter ringing out clear and high, piercing the hum of the city traffic. A couple was walking a dog. A teenager was practicing tricks on a skateboard. I found an empty bench and sat down. I leaned my head back and looked up at the sky. The first stars were just beginning to appear, faint pinpricks of light, struggling against the city glow. I thought about Elena sitting in her cell. I wondered if she was still angry, or if the fear had finally set in. I wondered if she realized that the Project Bluebird trap wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a mirror. I had held it up to her face, and she had been so horrified by her own reflection that she tried to smash it, cutting herself to ribbons in the process. I took a deep breath. The knot of anger that had been living in my chest for half a year was gone. It wasn't replaced by joy exactly. It was replaced by a quiet, steady peace. The kind of peace you feel when the clock is finally put back together, the gears are aligned, and the ticking starts steady and true. She wanted to take away my home. She wanted to take away my name. She wanted to strip me down to nothing. But in her greed, she had given me the greatest gift of all. She had forced me to stand up. She had forced me to be the man my father believed I was. She wanted to take everything I owned. But the most valuable thing she unintentionally gave me was the opportunity to cut the final toxic thread that bound us together. And the price she paid for that lesson: everything. The screen fades to black. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you in the comments section below. Please let me know where you are tuning in from today, so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel Calm Revenge Stories, hitting the like button and pressing the hype button to help this video reach more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay safe and see you in the next story.